It was supposed to be the season of slowing down. At 67, John Miller had traded in the grind of the factory floor for quiet mornings in his Ohio home, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, and the comfort of knowing he had done right by his family. For 43 years, he had clocked long, grueling shifts at the machine shop, working overtime through bitter winters and sweltering summers. Every missed vacation, every postponed purchase, every aching backache had been for one reason: Rachel. His only daughter, Rachel, had grown up with every opportunity he never had. Music lessons, summer camps, a reliable car the day she turned 16. John and his wife, Linda, made sure of it. But the girl who once made him handmade Father's Day cards had changed. Somewhere along the way, Rachel had traded gratitude for entitlement and partnership for dependence. Now married to Chad, a man who treated work like an optional hobby, Rachel had developed a habit of calling her father not to share news or love but to request money. And not just for emergencies, designer handbags, overdue credit cards, and most recently, Chad's mounting gambling debts. The breaking point came one tense evening when Rachel, her voice sharp with accusation, claimed John was hoarding his savings while she and Chad were drowning. She didn't mention the luxury SUV parked in her driveway or the shopping bags still in the hall. She didn't see decades of sacrifice, only an untapped bank account she believed she deserved. That night, John realized the truth. His years of giving had built not gratitude, but a dependency that was about to explode. The tension in the Miller home had been brewing for years, but that night it boiled over. It started like so many of their conversations had lately, with Rachel walking in without knocking, Chad right behind her, wearing that smug half-smile that John had come to despise. They sank into the living room like they owned the place. "Dad," Rachel began, tossing her designer bag onto the couch, "we need to talk about the inheritance." John froze mid-sip of his coffee. "The inheritance?" "Yes," Chad chimed in, leaning back in the chair like he was the one paying the mortgage. "What's the point of letting it sit there? You can't take it with you." John set his mug down, the ceramic clinking against the table. "Rachel, your mother and I have worked our whole lives for our retirement. You'll get what's in our will when the time comes." Rachel's eyes flashed. "We need it now, Dad. We're drowning." John glanced at her manicured nails, the fresh highlights in her hair, the gleaming watch on her wrist. Drowning looked an awful lot like floating on a raft made of credit cards. "Drowning from choices you made," John said evenly. "From debts you created." That's when Rachel's tone shifted from pleading to venom. "You're hoarding money while your only daughter suffers. What kind of father does that?" The words stung not because they were true, but because of the sheer gall it took to say them after decades of sacrifice. Chad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, old man, you're not getting any younger. Why not enjoy seeing your family benefit from your money while you're still alive, old man?" That one landed differently. John felt his jaw tighten. He remembered every 12-hour day, every missed holiday dinner, every late-night drive home through Ohio snowstorms so his daughter could have more than he ever did. And now here she was, standing in his home, calling him selfish for not handing over the last of what he had. From the kitchen doorway, Linda stepped in, dish towel in hand, her voice quiet but urgent. "Please, everyone, let's just calm down." But Rachel was beyond calming. She jabbed a finger toward the framed family photo on the mantel. "This is my home too. I grew up here. Mom helped pay for it. You can't just shut me out." John walked to the door and opened it wide, letting the cool evening air spill into the room. Honeysuckle drifted in from the garden outside, a reminder that the world was still turning normally for other families. "Rachel," he said, his voice low but firm, "take your husband and leave. Don't come back until you're ready to have a respectful conversation about your finances and solutions that don't involve my wallet." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you, remember this moment." She stormed past him, heels clicking across the hardwood like warning shots. Chad followed, pausing at the threshold. "Family doesn't abandon family," he muttered. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. For a long moment, John stood there, his hands still gripping the brass handle. Through the glass, he watched Rachel's SUV back out of the driveway at a speed that would have earned anyone else a ticket. The silence afterward was heavier than their shouting had been. Linda moved beside him, her voice soft. She's struggling, John. She's choosing. He replied. Every debt, every crisis, those were choices. He looked around the living room, at the Persian rug now stained with the coffee Rachel had spilled in her fury, at the scattered documents from the folder where he kept his will and retirement accounts. He'd spent years thinking those papers represented love, security, and the legacy he would leave behind. Now they felt like a weapon one his own daughter believed she was entitled to seize before his time. John had always assumed that when trouble came, it would come from the outside, a scammer, a dishonest contractor, a stranger looking for an easy mark. He never imagined it would walk through his front door wearing his daughter's face. And deep down, he knew this fight wasn't over. Rachel had never been one to accept no without finding a way to turn it into yes, whatever was coming next. It wouldn't be an apology. 6 days passed after Rachel's outburst, but the sting of her words hadn't faded. The house was quieter than usual. Too quiet. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits demanding money. For 3 years, John had grown used to her crises showing up on his phone like clockwork. By day 3, she would normally start small, an apologetic message, a just checking in call before easing into a new plea for cash. But this silence felt different, calculated. On Father's Day morning, the Ohio sky was a soft summer blue. John sat on the front porch with the Sunday paper, trying to settle into a routine that felt normal again. Across the street, neighbors were packing cars for picnics and backyard barbecues. Somewhere down the block, the faint laughter of children carried on the breeze. Inside, Linda moved around the kitchen, the clink of breakfast dishes a comforting soundtrack. The hum of a delivery truck broke the calm. A brown UPS truck slowed to a stop in front of their driveway. John frowned. He hadn't ordered anything, and Sunday deliveries usually cost extra. The driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. "Happy Father's Day, Mr. Miller," he said, passing over a medium-sized cardboard box. "Someone must think a lot of you to pay for Sunday shipping." John took the package, noting its surprising lightness. No return address, just a generic shipping label. He carried it into the living room and set it on the coffee table. Linda came in, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Who's it from?" "No idea," John replied. She stepped closer, her brow furrowing. "John, don't open it." He looked at her. "Why not?" She pointed to something he'd missed, the tiny, evenly spaced holes punched into the cardboard. "Those are breathing holes. That means something alive is in there." A cold shiver ran through him. Now that she'd pointed it out, he could hear it to a faint rustle inside, like something shifting in its confined space. And then, unmistakably, a soft hiss. They both froze. John's mind raced. Who would send them something alive? The timing, the anonymity, the fact that it arrived on a day they'd certainly be home. It all felt deliberate. Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. "Call 911. John's hands shook as he dialed. "We've got a suspicious package," he told the dispatcher. "It's got breathing holes. It's making sounds hissing." The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, but firm. "Do not touch or open the package. Officers will be there in under 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like an hour. The hissing came again, louder now, and John instinctively took a step back. He glanced at Linda, and without either of them saying it, they both knew who they suspected. Rachel. The sound of car doors slamming outside snapped them to attention. 2 officers entered, assessed the package, and confirmed the suspicion. "Sounds like a snake," Officer Reeves said matter-of-factly. "Could be non-venomous, but we're calling animal control." When animal control arrived, they worked with the practiced calm of people who had seen worse. Within minutes, the box was carefully opened, revealing a 3-foot corn snake coiled inside. Non-venomous, but definitely not a gift. Someone had paid good money for it and shipped it overnight to arrive exactly on Father's Day. As the specialists secured the snake and the officers made notes, John's mind replayed an image from weeks earlier, his credit card bill, with a $127 charge from Reptile World. Rachel still had an authorized user card. At the time, he'd assumed it was some odd purchase for the kids. Now, The truth hit hard. This wasn't a prank from a stranger. This was a message from his own daughter. And if Rachel thought this would scare him into opening his wallet again, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. That night, long after the animal control van disappeared down the street, John sat at his kitchen table staring at the credit card bill he had pulled from the desk drawer. The statement was already a month old, but one line might as well have been written in flashing neon. Reptile World, $127.50. Rachel had been an authorized user on his account for over 20 years. A privilege meant for emergencies back when she was in college. Over the years, emergency had expanded to include spa visits, luxury handbags, and must-have items for the kids. But this was different. Linda stood at the counter, drying the last of the dinner dishes. She didn't have to ask what he was thinking. They'd been married long enough to read each other's silences. You think it was her, she said quietly. John nodded slowly. I know it was her. The realization didn't come with shock anymore. That had passed earlier in the day, when the police had lifted the snake from its box, and John saw it for what it was. Not a gift, not even a prank, but a deliberate act meant to scare and humiliate him. Or still, he needed to hear it from her, or at least give her the chance to deny it. He dialed her number, 2 rings, and she answered, her voice overly bright. Hey, Dad, how's your Father's Day? Interesting, John said, keeping his tone level. I got a strange gift today. You wouldn't happen to know anything about it, would you? A pause, then no. What happened? Too quick, too rehearsed. And then, faint but unmistakable, John heard it, the low chuckle of Chad in the background. Not surprised laughter, not confusion. This was the smug, satisfied laugh of someone who thought they'd pulled off something clever. Every last shred of doubt vanished. Just a delivery mix-up, John said flatly. Nothing important. He ended the call before his voice could betray the storm building in his chest. Linda was watching him closely. She laughed. No, Chad did. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of what this meant hanging heavy in the air. Sending the snake wasn't a heat of the moment outburst. It required planning, money, and a disturbing level of spite. Rachel hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it entirely. John excused himself to his home office, closing the door behind him. The room was small but orderly, his refuge during the chaos of Rachel's constant financial crises. Tonight, it would become the command center for something he should have done years ago. He pulled up his online banking portal, the familiar login almost muscle memory after decades. First, he navigated to the credit card account and found Rachel's name under authorized users. A simple click on remove brought up a confirmation screen. He hovered over the button for 10 long seconds, not from doubt, but from the sheer finality of it. Then he clicked user access revoked. One by one, he shut down the pipelines she had been tapping for years, automatic monthly transfers to her checking account, direct payments for her car insurance, the gym membership she swore was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation felt like lifting a brick from his shoulders. Linda tapped lightly on the door. You okay? John leaned back in his chair. Better than I've felt in years. He remembered the call just a month ago, Rachel crying about unexpected gambling debts, promising this was the last time. He'd sent her $5,000, convincing himself it was an act of love. In truth, he'd been teaching her that consequences were optional. Not anymore. By the time he shut down the last payment, it was nearly midnight. For the first time in decades, John went to bed without the gnawing dread of what tomorrow's emergency might cost him. Rachel had wanted to send him a message with that snake. She'd just never expected the message she'd get in return. The next morning, the phone rang at 8:15 on the dot. John had been expecting it. Good morning, Rachel, he answered, sipping his coffee like it was any other day. Dad, what have you done? Her voice was shrill with panic. My card isn't working. The car insurance payment bounced. The rent's due in 3 days. What is going on? John didn't raise his voice. I know you sent me that Father's Day package. The silence on the other end was brief but telling. Then came the defensive tone, sharp and fast. You've lost your mind. How could you set me up like this? Set her up? Not what are you talking about? Not what package? Just pure deflection. I didn't set you up, Rachel. I just stopped paying for your responsibility. This is insane. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, and responsibilities, John cut in. Like the responsibility to treat your parents with respect. Like managing your own finances instead of leaning on mine. Her voice shifted gears into something softer, calculated her victim mode. Dad, please, you don't understand. Chad and I are struggling. The kids have been used as bargaining chips every time you don't get what you want, John said. His tone now like steel. That ends now. The line went silent except for her quick breathing. Then, colder than he'd ever heard. You'll regret this. Emma and Jake won't even remember you by the time I'm done. He didn't flinch. Those threats stopped working yesterday. There was no goodbye. The line went dead. John set the phone down and looked at Linda, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway. She didn't need to ask what happened. His calm expression said it all. She's coming, Linda said quietly. I know, he replied. Probably with Chad. The roar of an engine in the driveway came minutes later, followed by the slam of two car doors. Heavy, fast footsteps pounded up the front walk. The doorbell rang once hard, then again before either of them could answer. John stood, but Linda's voice stopped him. We're in this together. He opened the door to find Rachel and Chad on the porch, looking like they'd come to war. Rachel's face was flushed, her hair unkempt from the rushed drive. Chad loomed just behind her, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. We need to talk, Rachel said, her voice vibrating with rage. We already did, John replied, staying in the doorway. And I was clear. You were insane, she shot back. You can't just cut me off over some stupid misunderstanding about a Father's Day gift. There's no misunderstanding. You sent me a snake. I responded appropriately. Chad stepped forward, his bulk filling more of the doorway. Look, old man, maybe you didn't think this through. Rachel's got bills, kids need things, and their mother uses them as weapons when she doesn't get money, John interrupted evenly. Rachel's lips curled. Fine, you want to play hardball. You'll never see your grandchildren again. Ever. That's not a threat, John said, his voice low and deliberate. That's a blessing, because no child should be taught that love is just a transaction. For the first time, Rachel looked rattled, but Chad wasn't done. He stepped even closer, his tone dropping to something darker. We know where you live. We know your routines. You might want to reconsider your position. Are you threatening me? John asked. Just saying family works both ways, Chad sneered. Then disappear quietly, John said, or the police will handle it. Rachel yanked on Chad's arm, pulling him back toward the car. She didn't look at her father again. Chad threw one last glare before climbing into the passenger seat. John watched them peel out of the driveway, tires squealing, before closing the door. Linda stood beside him. Her hands were trembling, but there was pride in her eyes. We're going to need legal advice, John said. That night, after the roar of Rachel's SUV faded into the distance, the Miller home felt heavier than it had in years. Linda brewed chamomile tea, setting a cup in front of John as they sat at the kitchen table, the place where every important decision in their marriage had been made. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Linda broke the silence. I keep thinking about when she was little, she said softly. Remember that Mother's Day when she made breakfast in bed? Burned toast, orange juice with too much pulp, but she was so proud. John nodded. He remembered it vividly. He also remembered the pink construction paper cards, the stick figure drawings of their family, the endless little signs of love that used to fill the house. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's daughter now. She's still our daughter, Linda said, almost to herself. John took a slow sip of tea before answering. She crossed a line today, Linda, and it's not just about the snake or the threats. It's about knowing she will keep coming back over and over, until she takes everything we've worked for. Linda's eyes searched his. What are you thinking? Something permanent, John said. Something that ensures today never happens again. It didn't take her long to understand. You're talking about the will. Yes, and not just the will. We need real legal protections. She's shown she'll intimidate us if we don't give in. That ends now. Linda looked down at her tea, her fingers tightening around the cup. If we cut her out completely, She didn't finish the sentence. We protect ourselves, John said gently. We protect what we've built, and we make sure our grandchildren aren't raised to think love comes with a price tag. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. Then tomorrow morning, we call Margaret Collins. Margaret had been their attorney for 15 years, handled the house closing, updated their wills, even helped settle Linda's mother's estate. If anyone could create airtight protections, it was her. The next morning, John called her office at 9 o'clock. Sharp. By 11 o'clock, they were sitting in Margaret's third-floor office downtown. Surrounded by shelves of leather-bound legal volumes, Margaret listened without interruption as John laid it all out. The inheritance argument, the snake delivery, the financial cutoff, and yesterday's doorstep confrontation. By the time he finished, she was leaning back in her chair, pen poised above her legal pad. This goes far beyond a family disagreement, she said firmly. You're describing harassment, intimidation, and a clear pattern of manipulation. We can address this on multiple fronts. John nodded. That's exactly what we need. Margaret began outlining their options. First, restructure the will. We can create an educational trust for Emma and Jake, she explained. It will cover tuition, books, and legitimate school expenses managed by an independent trustee. Your daughter and her husband will have no access. Linda exhaled slowly. That's exactly what we want. Second, a restraining order. Given the snake incident and yesterday's threats, Margaret continued, we have grounds. Once it's granted, any attempt by Rachel or Chad to contact you becomes a legal matter, not a personal standoff. Third, documentation. From now on, keep detailed records, calls, texts, visits, anything. If they violate the order, it strengthens your case for further legal action. By the time they left her office, John felt lighter than he had in months. For decades, he had carried the burden of keeping the peace with Rachel, thinking it was the only way to stay connected to his daughter and grandchildren. Now, for the first time, he realized that peace built on fear and financial hostage-taking wasn't peace at all. That evening, John and Linda sat together in the living room. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, grills firing up for dinner. You think this will stop her? Linda asked. It will remove her incentive, John said. No money to take, no leverage to hold over us. She'll have to find someone else to manipulate. Linda reached over and took his hand. I hate that it's come to this. So do I, he said, squeezing her hand back. But I won't let her destroy what we've built. Not anymore. Tomorrow, the legal process would begin. Tonight, they would sit in their own home, knowing that the next time Rachel tried to cross their threshold with demands and threats, the law not guilt would be waiting for her. 2 days later, the phone rang mid-afternoon. It was Margaret. John, she said, her voice calm, but carrying that quiet satisfaction of a job completed. The documents were delivered at 2:15 today. Rachel and Chad have both been served with the restraining order, and they've received the official notice of your will modifications. John sat back in his chair, letting her words sink in. Outside the window, spring sunlight filtered through the branches of the maple tree in their front yard. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson was planting flowers while her grandkids laughed in the driveway. It all felt so normal. It's done, he said after a moment. It's done, Margaret. Confirmed. From here on, any attempt they make to contact you directly becomes a criminal matter. And with the will changes, there's no financial incentive left to keep pushing. When he hung up, he found Linda standing in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still in her hands. That was Margaret? She asked. John nodded. The papers are served. She walked over, sat beside him, and took his hand. They didn't need to discuss what Rachel's reaction might be. They both knew Rachel wouldn't take rejection quietly. But for the first time in 30 years, her anger wouldn't come with the power to shake their lives apart. For decades, John had been her safety net, catching every fall, covering every emergency, writing check after check under the belief that one day she'd get back on her feet. Instead, she had learned that there was no such thing as rock bottom, not when her parents were willing to dig her out every time. Now, that pattern was broken. Rachel had spent years threatening to cut off access to Emma and Jake whenever John refused a demand. But in trying to push harder with the snake, the doorstep threats, the intimidation, she had done something she never expected. She'd cut herself off. The grandchildren's futures were now secured through the educational trust, with every dollar locked behind professional oversight. Their parents couldn't touch it, not for debts, not for shopping, not for the next poker table Chad decided to sit at. "Do you think she understands what she's lost?" Linda asked quietly. "She will," John said. "Maybe not today. But when she realizes she can't get a dime from us, and that the kids' money is out of reach, it'll hit her." Linda's expression softened into something like relief. "And if she tries to get around it, then it becomes the police department's problem, not ours." John thought about that snake in the box, how it had been meant to scare him into compliance. Instead, it had been the last straw. The box might as well have contained 30 years of unpaid debts, sleepless nights, and manipulated guilt, all coiled up and waiting to strike. He'd carried that weight long enough. That evening, they sat down to dinner without the undercurrent of tension that had shadowed their meals for years. The phone didn't ring. No text messages pinged with urgent requests. No threats about seeing the kids dangled over their heads like a sword. The quiet felt foreign at first, like the silence after a storm that had gone on for so long you forgot what calm sounded like. But as they cleared the dishes and settled into the living room, John realized it wasn't just quiet, it was freedom. Rachel and Chad could rage, they could scheme, they could try to twist the truth in their own circles, but legally, they had no access to his life anymore, no leverage, no back door into his finances. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over Maple Street, John knew he'd wake up in a home finally protected not by locks on the doors, but by boundaries he should have set years ago. The next 48 hours passed in a kind of quiet John and Linda hadn't felt in decades. No phone calls demanding money, no frantic voicemails about emergencies that somehow always ended with a transfer request, no threats about not seeing Emma and Jake. John woke each morning without the knot of dread in his stomach, sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, and actually read the newspaper without glancing at his phone every few minutes. Linda tended her herb garden in the kitchen window, humming softly, something he realized she hadn't done in months. On Thursday afternoon, the call came from Margaret. "John," she said, "I just wanted to confirm both Rachel and Chad were served the restraining order and notified of the will changes at 2:15 today." "It's finished, then," John said, leaning back in his chair. "It's finished," Margaret confirmed. "The court order is in effect immediately. If they try to contact you, call the police. And the trust for Emma and Jake is secure, managed by a third-party trustee, untouchable by their parents." After hanging up, John sat quietly for a few moments, staring out the front window. Across the street, the Henderson kids were riding their bikes, weaving figure eights in the driveway while their grandmother clapped and cheered. A normal Thursday afternoon in small-town Ohio. Linda appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "That was Margaret. They've been served," John said simply. She came to sit beside him, taking his hand. They didn't talk about how Rachel might react. They didn't need to. Whatever storm was brewing on her end would have to crash against the hard wall of the law now, not their front porch. For the first time in 30 years, John felt truly untouchable. Rachel had always believed she could manipulate the situation because she held the grandchildren card, deny her money, and suddenly Emma and Jake were too busy to visit. Given, and miraculously, there they were for Sunday dinner. It was a cruel game, and John had played along far too long. But in trying to push harder with the snake, with the threat, she'd miscalculated. She'd triggered something in him he didn't think he had left, a willingness to walk away. The grandchildren's trust fund ensured they would have every educational opportunity, college tuition, books, tutoring, without a dime passing through Rachel or Chad's hands. And now that the restraining order was in place, John knew he'd see them again only if Rachel decided to act like a parent instead of a puppet master. "Do you think she realizes what she's lost?" Linda asked quietly. "Not yet," John said, "but she will. There's no inheritance to fight for now, no way to get at our accounts. Once the reality sets in, she'll move on, find someone else to squeeze." Linda's face was a mix of relief and sadness. "I hate that it's come to this." "So do I," John admitted. "But I'm done being her safety net. I've caught her every time she's fallen. And all it's taught her is that she doesn't have to learn how to stand on her own." He thought of that snake in the box, how it had been meant to frighten him into compliance. Instead, it had been the final push he needed to take back control of his life. That night, they ate dinner in peace, the television murmuring softly in the background. Afterward, they lingered at the table, sipping coffee, talking about weekend plans that didn't involve bailing anyone out of trouble. It was a strange feeling, this freedom, not loud or triumphant, but steady, like a weight lifted from their shoulders. The house felt different, lighter, safer. John knew Rachel might still try something. Old habits die hard. But this time, he was ready. The difference was that now, she'd be fighting the law, not him. The days that followed felt like stepping into a different life. For the first time in decades, John and Linda's home wasn't a place where demands arrived like clockwork. It was a sanctuary again, a place for slow mornings, shared meals, and quiet evenings without the undercurrent of dread. The bank accounts remained untouched, growing for their own security instead of draining into someone else's bad decisions. The phone sat on the counter in blessed silence, no longer a weapon for guilt or manipulation. One afternoon, as John sorted through old boxes in the attic, he found a small showbox filled with cards Rachel had made as a child, crayon drawings of stick figure families holding hands, scribbled "I love you" notes on construction paper. He sat there for a long time, holding those memories, feeling the sting of what had been lost and the weight of what had been preserved. He realized something important in that moment. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity, your safety, or your future. Sometimes the most loving act is setting boundaries so strong they can't be pushed over. Because without them, love becomes something twisted, used as currency instead of connection. That night, over dinner, Linda smiled at him. "It feels like we've got our lives back," she said. John nodded. "We do. And I'm not giving it away again." The snake had been meant as a weapon, a way to frighten him into opening his wallet one more time. Instead, it had been the catalyst for taking back control, for saying enough. And now, the grandchildren's futures were safe, the marriage was free from constant strain, and the home they'd built was truly their own again. In life, love and loyalty should never come at the cost of your self-respect or peace of mind. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're guardrails that keep your relationships healthy and your heart safe. The moment you realize that saying no doesn't make you unloving, but rather wise, is the moment you start living free. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect yourself or your family, you know the courage it takes. And if you're still wrestling with whether to draw that line, remember, you're not just protecting your money, you're protecting your future, your marriage, and your peace. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? How did it change your relationship and your life? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more true to life stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all what really matters. Your voice matters here. Let's keep this conversation going.